The noose waited in the town square at dawn, and Sarah Mitchell knew it was meant for her neck. She stood in the cramped jail cell in Dodge City, Kansas, her hands gripping the cold iron bars as the August heat of 1878 already began to seep through the stone walls. Outside, she could hear the hammering as men constructed the gallows platform, each strike of the hammer driving deeper into her chest like a nail into a coffin. 3 days ago, she had been a respected seamstress in this dusty cattle town, saving every penny to open her own dress shop. Now she was a condemned thief, accused of stealing 200 pounds of grain from the Morrison mill, grain that would have fed a dozen families through the coming winter. "I never touched that grain," she whispered to herself for the 1,000th time, her voice cracking with exhaustion. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die for a crime she did not commit. The evidence against her was damning and swift. The mill owner, Gerald Morrison, had found her embroidered handkerchief near the broken storage room door. Her initials, SM, were stitched clearly in the corner in pale blue thread. She had lost that handkerchief weeks ago, dropped it somewhere in town, but no one believed her. Morrison was a powerful man, a founding member of Dodge City's Merchant Council, and his word carried weight that hers never could. The judge had sentenced her within an hour of the trial, hanging at sunrise 2 days hence. Now those 2 days had nearly passed, and Sarah had run out of tears. She sat on the wooden bench that served as her bed, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders, her green dress stained with the dirt of the cell. She thought of her mother back in Missouri, who would receive a letter telling her that her only daughter had died a criminal. She thought of the dress shop she would never open, the life she would never live, the love she would never find. The sun was setting outside, painting the cell in shades of orange and red. Sheriff Hawkins had told her this morning that the hanging would take place at sunrise. She had perhaps 10 hours left to live. The jail door creaked open, and heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Sarah did not look up. She had no more words left for the curious townspeople who came to gawk at the thief, no more pleas for the sheriff who believed her guilty despite his kind eyes. "Miss Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, low and rough like gravel, but somehow gentle. Sarah lifted her head and found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his dusty brown shirt. A weathered cowboy hat sat on his head, and beneath it, she could see dark hair and eyes the color of warm honey. His face was tanned from years under the prairie sun, with strong features that might have been carved from the Kansas rock itself. A silver star gleamed on his chest. "My name is Jack Thornton," he said, stepping closer to the bars. "I am a range detective with the Cattlemen's Association. I rode in from Abilene this afternoon." Sarah stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "I do not understand. Why would a range detective care about stolen grain?" Jack removed his hat, holding it in his large, calloused hands. "Because I do not think you stole anything, Miss Mitchell, and I aim to prove it before the sun comes up tomorrow." Hope, dangerous and painful, flared in Sarah's chest. "Everyone else in this town believes I'm guilty. The evidence against me is clear. Why would you think differently?" Jack's honey-colored eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I have spent the last 5 years tracking rustlers and thieves across 3 states. And I have learned to read guilt in a person's face. When I saw you through this cell window an hour ago, I did not see guilt. I saw terror and innocence and fury at an injustice. That is not the face of a thief." "But the handkerchief," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "it is mine. My initials are on it." "Which means either you dropped it while committing the crime, or someone placed it there to frame you," Jack said. He pulled a small stool closer to the cell and sat down, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tell me everything, Miss Mitchell. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how small it seems." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, how desperate. But this man, this stranger, was offering her something no one else had: belief. She took a shaky breath and began to speak. I came to Dodge City 2 years ago from Missouri. My father died in the war, and my mother remarried a man who did not want me in his house. I had some skill with a needle, so I found work as a seamstress. I have been saving money to open my own shop. The words came faster now, spilling out like water from a broken dam. 3 weeks ago, I lost my handkerchief. I remember the day clearly because I was walking past the Silver Dollar Saloon and a fight broke out in the street. I had to step aside quickly and I must have dropped it then. I did not realize it was gone until that evening. Jack leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. Did anyone see you drop it? I do not know. The street was crowded. It was a Saturday afternoon. And the night of the theft? Where were you? In my room above Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. I was working on a wedding dress for Catherine Burke. She is getting married next month, and the dress is very elaborate. I worked until nearly midnight, and Mrs. Henderson brought me tea around 10 o'clock. She can confirm I was there. The sheriff mentioned that in his report, Jack said, but Morrison claims the theft happened after midnight, which means you had no witness for the crucial hours. Sarah felt her brief hope beginning to fade. Then how can you possibly prove my innocence? I have no alibi and the evidence says I'm guilty. Jack stood, placing his hat back on his head with a determined gesture. Because evidence can be planted, Miss Mitchell, and the guilty often make mistakes. I have 10 hours until sunrise. That is enough time if I work fast and think smart. He reached through the bars, and Sarah was so surprised that she took his offered hand without thinking. His grip was warm and strong, his palm rough with calluses from years of hard work. I give you my word that I will find the truth. You will not hang at dawn. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, the first tears of hope rather than despair. Why are you doing this? You do not even know me. Jack's expression softened, and something flickered in his honey-colored eyes that Sarah could not quite name. Because I have seen too many innocents suffer while the guilty go free, and because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. He released her hand and turned toward the door, but Sarah called out to him, Mr. Thornton, what if you cannot find the proof in time? Jack looked back at her, and his voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Then I will cut you down from that noose myself and put you on a horse heading for California before this town knows what happened. One way or another, Sarah Mitchell, you are not going to die tomorrow. That is a promise. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the corridor, and Sarah was left alone in her cell with something she had not felt in 3 days. Hope. Jack stepped out into the Dodge City evening, his mind already working through the problem like a complex knot that needed untangling. The street was busy with cowhands and merchants finishing their business before nightfall. The smell of dust and horse manure mixed with the aroma of cooking meat from the nearby restaurants. He had perhaps 9 hours now until sunrise, and he needed to make every minute count. His first stop was the Morrison Mill, a large wooden structure at the edge of town near the Arkansas River. Gerald Morrison was locking the front door when Jack approached, a portly man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and the satisfied expression of someone who had just won a significant victory. Mr. Morrison, Jack Thornton, range detective. I would like to ask you some questions about the grain theft. Morrison turned, his expression souring. The thief has been caught and sentenced. I failed to see what questions remain. Humor me, Jack said, keeping his voice level. I am investigating similar thefts in neighboring counties. Your case might provide useful information. This was a lie, but it served its purpose. Morrison's expression shifted to one of self-importance. Well, I suppose I can spare a few minutes. What do you want to know? Walk me through the discovery of the theft. Morrison puffed up his chest. I arrived at the mill at 6 o'clock in the morning, as I do every day. I immediately noticed the storage room door was broken. The lock had been pried off. When I checked inside, 200 pounds of grain were missing. Premium wheat, mind you, worth at least $40. And you found the handkerchief? Right there on the floor, not 3 feet from the door. It had fallen behind a barrel, which is probably why the thief did not realize she had dropped it. Jack knelt down near where Morrison was pointing, examining the ground carefully. The door was pried open, you said? That would take considerable strength. Miss Mitchell is a small woman. Morrison waved a dismissive hand. Determination can make a person stronger than they look. Besides, the evidence does not lie. That handkerchief was hers. Who else knew about the theft before you reported it to the sheriff? Morrison paused, thinking. Well, I told my assistant Thomas Reed when he arrived at 7, and I sent word to the sheriff immediately after that. Why does it matter? Just being thorough, Jack said, standing and brushing dust from his knees. This Thomas Reed, where can I find him? He lives in a room behind the mill, but I assure you Thomas had nothing to do with this. He has worked for me for 5 years and is completely trustworthy. Jack nodded politely and left Morrison to his evening, but his instincts were already humming. In his experience, the people most quickly declared trustworthy were often worth investigating. He made his way around the mill to the small structure behind it, little more than a shack with a crooked chimney. Thomas Reed answered the door on the second knock. He was a young man, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and nervous blue eyes. When he saw Jack's star, his face went pale. Mr. Reed, I am investigating the grain theft. I have a few questions. I already told the sheriff everything I know, Thomas said, his voice high and tight. Then it should be easy to tell me as well, Jack said, his tone friendly but firm. May I come in? Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside. The room was sparse but neat, with a bed, a small table, and a trunk in the corner. Jack's experienced eyes swept the space, noting details. A new pair of boots by the door, expensive looking, a silver pocket watch on the table, far too fine for a mill assistant's wages. Nice watch, Jack commented casually. Thomas's hand went to the watch protectively. It was my father's. Your father must have been a wealthy man. He did well enough, Thomas said, but his eyes would not meet Jack's. Jack changed tactics. You arrived at work the morning of the theft at 7 o'clock? That is right. And Mr. Morrison told you about the missing grain? Yes, I was as shocked as anyone. We have never had a theft before. Did you see anyone suspicious around the mill in the days before the theft? Thomas shook his head quickly. No, no one. What about Miss Mitchell? Had you seen her near the mill? Miss Mitchell? Thomas's voice went up an octave. No, she came by once about 3 weeks ago. She was asking about buying some grain for Mrs. Henderson's chickens, but that is the only time I remember seeing her. Jack felt something click in his mind. 3 weeks ago? And did she buy the grain? No, she said the price was too high. She left. Did she come inside the mill? Just into the front office. She spoke with Mr. Morrison. Jack kept his expression neutral, but his heart was beating faster. And would that have been around the time she might have dropped her handkerchief? Thomas's face went from pale to white. I do not know. Maybe. Jack leaned against the table, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. Thomas, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Did you steal that grain? No. Thomas's denial came too fast, too loud. I would never. Mr. Morrison has been good to me. But money is tight, is it not? Mill assistants do not make much. Those boots are new. That watch is expensive. Where did you get the money? Thomas backed toward the wall, his breathing rapid. I saved it. I have been saving for months. Jack stood slowly, his tall frame filling the small room. Son, I have been tracking thieves for 5 years. I know when a man is lying. You can tell me the truth now or you can tell it to the judge, but one way or another, the truth is coming out tonight, because an innocent woman is going to hang at sunrise if I do not find proof of who really took that grain. Thomas's legs seemed to give out, and he sank onto his bed, his head in his hands. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I did not mean for her to hang. I swear I did not mean for any of this." Jack felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. "Tell me what happened, Thomas, all of it." The words came tumbling out like a confession at a revival meeting. "I owed money to a gambling house in Wichita, $50. They sent men to collect, and they said if I did not pay, they would kill me. I was desperate. I knew where Mr. Morrison kept the key to the storage room, and I knew the grain was worth enough to cover my debt. I planned it carefully. I would take the grain, sell it to a buyer in another town, and no one would ever know." "But you needed someone to blame," Jack said. Thomas nodded miserably. "I found the handkerchief in the street 3 weeks ago, after Miss Mitchell left the mill. I recognized it because I had seen her embroidering in the park one day. I kept it, thinking maybe it would be useful someday. When I stole the grain, I left it by the door. I thought maybe Mr. Morrison would think it was just a coincidence that she had dropped it weeks before. I did not know he would call the sheriff so quickly that they would arrest her so fast." "But you let her stay arrested. You let her be tried and convicted. You were going to let her hang." Jack's voice was hard now, the gentleness gone. "I was scared." Thomas looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I know it was wrong. I have not slept in 3 days. Every time I close my eyes, I see her in that cell. But if I confessed, those men from Wichita would kill me." Jack grabbed Thomas by the shirt and hauled him to his feet. "Better you than an innocent woman. Get your coat. We are going to the sheriff." "They will hang me instead." "Maybe. Or maybe the judge will show mercy because you came forward. But even if they do hang you, at least you will die with a clean conscience instead of Miss Mitchell's blood on your hands." Thomas was crying openly now, but he reached for his coat with shaking hands. Jack kept a firm grip on his arm as they left the shack and headed back toward the center of town. The street lamps were being lit now, casting pools of yellow light in the gathering darkness. Jack could feel the minutes ticking away, each one bringing sunrise closer. Sheriff Hawkins was in his office, filling out paperwork by lamplight, when Jack pushed Thomas through the door. The sheriff looked up in surprise, then recognition dawned as he saw Thomas's tear-stained face. "Jack? What is going on?" "Sheriff, meet your real thief. Thomas Reed here has something to tell you." It took 20 minutes for Thomas to repeat his full confession, with Jack and Sheriff Hawkins asking questions to fill in every detail. The sheriff sent a deputy to wake Judge Parker, and another to fetch Gerald Morrison from his home. By 9 o'clock, the sheriff's office was crowded with people, all listening as Thomas Reed confessed to stealing the grain and framing Sarah Mitchell. Gerald Morrison's face went from red to purple as he listened. "You ungrateful wretch, after everything I did for you." "That is enough," Judge Parker said, his voice carrying authority despite his nightshirt and hastily donned coat. He turned to Thomas. "Young man, you understand that by confessing you are likely trading places with Miss Mitchell on that gallows?" Thomas nodded, his voice hoarse. "I understand, Your Honor. I cannot let her die for what I did. It is not right." Judge Parker studied him for a long moment, then looked at Jack. "Detective Thornton, I understand you were responsible for bringing this confession to light. The court owes you a debt of gratitude." "I was just doing my job, Your Honor. Now can we release Miss Mitchell?" "Immediately." Judge Parker turned to Sheriff Hawkins. "Release her at once and bring her here. She deserves to hear this confession in person." Sarah was dreaming of the noose when the cell door clanged open. She jerked awake, her heart hammering, certain they had come to take her early. But instead of the hangman, she found Sheriff Hawkins with a ring of keys and an expression she had never seen on his face before. Shame mixed with relief. "Miss Mitchell, you are free to go. We caught the real thief." Sarah could not move, could not breathe. "What?" "Jack Thornton found him. Got a full confession. The judge is waiting to see you at my office. Come on now, let us get you out of this cell." Sarah's legs were shaking as she stood, as she walked through the cell door that had been her prison for 3 days. The sheriff led her down the corridor and out into the main office, and there she saw Jack Thornton standing tall and solid in the lamplight, and something in her chest cracked open. Their eyes met across the room, and Jack smiled at her, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of joy and relief and something else, something warm and bright that she did not yet have a name for. "Mr. Thornton," she whispered, "you kept your promise." "I told you I would," Jack said simply. "You are free, Sarah, completely free." Judge Parker cleared his throat. "Miss Mitchell, on behalf of this court and this town, I offer you our deepest apologies. A terrible injustice was nearly done here tonight. Thomas Reed has confessed to the theft and to framing you. You are innocent of all charges, and your name will be publicly cleared tomorrow." Sarah listened as Thomas, from his new position in the jail cell she had just vacated, repeated his confession. She saw his tears, his remorse, and she felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. This man had nearly cost her life for $50 and his own cowardice. When Thomas finished, he looked at her through the bars. "Miss Mitchell, I know you have no reason to forgive me. I do not expect it, but I am truly, deeply sorry for what I have done to you." Sarah stood silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice steady. "I do not forgive you, Mr. Reed, not yet. Perhaps someday I will be able to, but not tonight. Tonight I am just grateful to be alive." Judge Parker nodded approvingly. "A fair response. Now, Miss Mitchell, you have had a terrible ordeal. Sheriff, make sure she gets back to her boarding house safely." "I will see her home," Jack said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "If that is acceptable to Miss Mitchell." Sarah looked at this man who had saved her life, this stranger who had believed in her when no one else would, and nodded. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Thornton." The night air was cool and sweet as they stepped outside, and Sarah breathed it in like she had never tasted air before. The street was quieter now, most of Dodge City having gone to bed. The stars overhead were brilliant, scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Sarah stopped walking and just looked up at them, marveling that a few hours ago she had thought she would never see the stars again. "Beautiful night," Jack said softly beside her. "The most beautiful night of my life," Sarah said, and then she started to laugh, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. "I am sorry. I think I'm a bit mad right now." "You have earned the right to be mad," Jack said, and there was warmth in his voice. "You have been through hell and back." They walked slowly toward Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, neither of them in a hurry despite the late hour. Sarah was acutely aware of Jack beside her, tall and solid and real. She kept glancing at him in the lamplight, taking in the strong lines of his face, the way his hand stayed near his gun out of habit, the way he scanned the street with eyes that missed nothing. "How did you know?" she asked finally. "How did you know I was innocent?" Jack was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I have been tracking criminals for 5 years now. Rustlers mostly, but also thieves and con men and every kind of scoundrel the West produces. I have learned to read people, to see the truth behind their words. When I looked at you in that cell, I saw fear and anger and hurt, but I did not see guilt. And I have seen enough guilty people to know the difference." "But it was more than that," Sarah said. "You could have been wrong. You risked your reputation on a guess." Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing beneath a street lamp, and its light cast shadows across his face that made him look both dangerous and gentle at the same time. "It was not just a guess, Sarah. It was instinct. And my instincts told me that you were worth fighting for." Sarah felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. "You keep saying that I am worth fighting for, but you do not know me." "I would like to," Jack said quietly, "if you would let me." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and the strange intimacy of two people who had been through something extraordinary together. Sarah realized that her heart was beating fast, not from fear this time, but from something entirely different. "I would like that too," she said softly. They started walking again, and this time Jack offered his arm. Sarah took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt sleeve, the warmth of him even through the fabric. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a neat 2-story building with a flower garden in front. "This is me," Sarah said, suddenly reluctant to let the evening end. "Will you be all right?" Jack asked. "That was a hell of an ordeal you went through." "I think I will sleep for about 3 days," Sarah said with a small smile, "and then I will probably cry for 3 more. But yes, I will be all right. Thanks to you." Jack reached up and gently touched her face, his calloused fingers rough against her cheek, but so tender it made her want to cry. "You are stronger than you know, Sarah Mitchell. You survived something that would have broken most people. Do not ever doubt that strength." "Will I see you tomorrow?" The words came out before Sarah could stop them, sounding far too eager, but she did not care. Jack smiled. "I will be at the Silver Dollar Saloon around noon, filing my report and getting a meal. If you happen to be walking by, I would not mind the company." "I think I might need to walk by the Silver Dollar tomorrow," Sarah said, feeling her own smile grow. "Around noon. Then I will look forward to it." Jack tipped his hat to her, a gesture that was somehow both courtly and completely natural. "Good night, Sarah. Sleep well." "Good night, Jack, and thank you for everything, for my life." "It was my honor," Jack said, and the way he said it, Sarah knew he meant it. She watched him walk away into the night, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the shadows, and then she went inside, her heart full of gratitude and hope, and the beginnings of something that felt dangerously like love. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the parlor, tears streaming down her plump face. "Oh, my dear girl, I heard the news. They caught the real thief. Oh, thank the Lord." Sarah found herself wrapped in a massive hug, Mrs. Henderson's ample figure enveloping her in warmth and the smell of lavender water. She let herself be held, let herself cry, let herself finally release the terror of the past 3 days. They stood there for long minutes, 2 women united in relief and joy, until finally Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I need to sleep, Mrs. Henderson. I need to sleep for about a year." "Of course, dear, of course. But first, tell me about this handsome detective who brought you home." "Jack Thornton, is it?" Despite her exhaustion, Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He saved my life. He believed in me when no one else would." Mrs. Henderson, who had been running a boarding house for 20 years and had seen more than her share of romance, smiled knowingly. "He did more than believe in you, dear. I saw the way he looked at you when you came in. That is a man who sees something special." "We only just met," Sarah protested weakly. "Sometimes that is all it takes. My late husband and I met on a Tuesday and were engaged by Friday. When you know, you know." Mrs. Henderson patted Sarah's hand. "Now off to bed with you. Tomorrow is a new day, and I suspect it is going to be a very interesting one." Sarah climbed the stairs to her small room, every muscle in her body aching with exhaustion. She did not even bother to change out of her dress, just collapsed onto the bed and fell instantly into the deepest sleep of her life. She dreamed of honey-colored eyes and strong hands and a voice promising that she was worth fighting for. The sun was high and hot when Sarah woke the next morning, streaming through her window with cheerful intensity. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the stone walls of the jail cell. When she realized she was in her own bed, in her own room, she felt a rush of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. She was free. She was alive. She was innocent, and everyone would know it. Sarah rose and washed her face in the basin, then changed into a clean dress, a soft yellow cotton that she had made herself. She brushed out her dark hair and pinned it up, her hands moving with automatic precision even as her mind raced. It was nearly 11 o'clock. Jack had said he would be at the Silver Dollar Saloon at noon. She tried to tell herself that her racing heart had nothing to do with seeing him again, that she was just grateful to her rescuer. But she knew it was more than that. Jack Thornton had awakened something in her, something warm and bright and full of possibility. In the span of one evening, he had become the most important person in her world. Mrs. Henderson had breakfast waiting, even though it was nearly lunchtime, and Sarah ate with an appetite she had not felt in days. The landlady chattered happily about the news spreading through town, how everyone was talking about Sarah's innocence and Jack Thornton's brilliant detective work. "The whole town knows you were wronged, dear. Gerald Morrison is beside himself with guilt," they say, "and Judge Parker is planning to make a public statement." Sarah nodded, only half listening. Her mind was on noon, on the silver dollar, on Jack. At 11:45, she left the boarding house, telling Mrs. Henderson she needed some fresh air. The older woman just smiled that knowing smile again and waved her off. Dodge City looked different in the daylight now that Sarah was not being marched to jail or to trial. She saw it with new eyes, the bustling cattle town full of life and noise and possibility. Cowboys rode past, driving cattle toward the stockyards. Merchants called out their wares. Somewhere a piano was playing, probably in one of the many saloons that lined Front Street. The Silver Dollar Saloon was easy to find, its false front building painted bright white with gold lettering. Sarah hesitated outside, suddenly nervous. What if Jack had not meant the invitation? What if he had just been being polite? What if he was already gone, riding out to his next case? She took a deep breath and pushed through the swinging doors. The saloon was busy with the lunch crowd. Cowboys and merchants and businessmen all crowded around tables, eating and drinking and talking. The smell of beer and tobacco and fried food filled the air. Sarah scanned the room, her heart sinking when she did not immediately see Jack. Then she heard his voice. "Sarah." He was sitting at a corner table, and he was standing now, his face lighting up when he saw her. Sarah felt her own face break into a smile as she crossed the room to him, not caring what anyone thought about a respectable seamstress entering a saloon alone. "You came?" Jack said, and the pleasure in his voice was unmistakable. "I said I would. Please sit." Jack pulled out a chair for her, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly natural. "Have you eaten? The steak here is decent." Sarah realized she was hungry again despite Mrs. Henderson's breakfast. "I could eat." Jack signaled the bartender and ordered 2 steak dinners and lemonade for Sarah, coffee for himself. Then he sat across from her, his honey-colored eyes warm in the dim saloon light. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep?" "Like the dead," Sarah said, then winced at her choice of words. "Sorry, poor phrasing. Given what you almost faced, I would say you have earned the right to any phrasing you want." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You look better. Less like you're about to shatter." "I felt like I was going to shatter yesterday. Today, I feel almost human again." Sarah paused, then said what she had been thinking all morning. "I owe you my life, Jack. I do not know how to repay that." Jack shook his head firmly. "You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone with a conscience should have done. The fact that others did not makes them guilty, not you indebted. Still, if there is ever anything I can do for you, anything at all, you only have to ask." Their food arrived, thick steaks with potatoes and beans, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Sarah found herself sneaking glances at Jack, taking in details she had missed in the urgency of last night, the way his hair curled slightly at the collar, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hands, so large and rough, handled his knife and fork with surprising delicacy. "Tell me about yourself," Sarah said finally. "You know my whole sad story. I know almost nothing about you." Jack smiled slightly. "My story is not very interesting. I grew up in Texas, son of a rancher. Learned to ride and rope before I could write my name. When I was 20, a rustling gang hit our ranch, stole 200 head of cattle. My father and I tracked them for 2 weeks, got the cattle back. After that, I realized I had a talent for tracking. Started hiring out to the Cattlemen's Association as a range detective. Been doing it ever since." "Do you like it? The tracking, the investigating?" "I am good at it," Jack said slowly, "and I believe in justice, in making sure the guilty pay and the innocent go free. But it is a lonely life, always moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, never staying long enough to... He trailed off, but his eyes met Sarah's, and she understood what he had not said. Never staying long enough to build a life, to find love. "How long will you stay in Dodge City?" Sarah asked, her heart suddenly tight. "I need to file my report with the association. That will take a few days. After that..." Jack shrugged. "I go where the work takes me." "And where is the work taking you next?" "There is a case in Denver. Rustlers hitting the ranches up in the high country. They want me there by the end of the month." 3 weeks. Sarah felt something in her chest clench at the thought. 3 weeks, and he would be gone. Riding off to the next case, the next town, the next adventure. And she would be here, building her dress shop, living her quiet life. Unless... The thought came unbidden, dangerous and thrilling. Unless she asked him to stay. Unless she gave him a reason to stay, but they had only just met. It was insane to think that one evening, no matter how intense, could be the foundation for anything real. And yet, as Sarah looked at Jack across the table, she felt a connection she had never felt with anyone else. A sense of rightness, of recognition, as if her soul knew his even though her mind barely did. "Tell me about this dress shop you want to open," Jack said, steering the conversation to safer ground. Sarah found herself talking about her dreams, about the designs she had sketched, about the kind of shop she wanted to create. Jack listened with genuine interest, asking questions, offering suggestions. They talked through the meal, and long after their plates were cleared, talked until the saloon began to fill with the afternoon crowd and the noise level rose. "Walk with me?" Jack asked finally. "Unless you have work to get back to?" "Catherine Burke's wedding dress can wait another day," Sarah said. "I would like to walk." They left the saloon and wandered through Dodge City with no particular destination in mind. Jack told her stories about his tracking cases, making her laugh with tales of incompetent criminals and near disasters. Sarah told him about her life in Missouri, about her mother and her journey to Kansas. They talked easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. The afternoon faded into evening, and they found themselves at the edge of town, looking out over the Arkansas River as it glinted in the setting sun. The water moved slowly, lazy and brown, flanked by cottonwood trees that rustled in the breeze. "This is my favorite time of day," Jack said quietly, "when the heat breaks and everything turns gold." "It is beautiful," Sarah agreed. She was very aware of how close Jack was standing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that if she just leaned slightly, she would be touching him. Jack turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made Sarah's breath catch. It was naked longing mixed with hesitation, desire tempered by respect. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean it even though it sounds crazy." "What is it?" "I've been drifting for 5 years, moving from place to place, never settling, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. I told myself it was because I loved the work, loved the freedom. But the truth is, I was just waiting for something or someone to make me want to stop drifting, to give me a reason to put down roots." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Jack could hear it. "Jack, when I saw you in that jail cell yesterday, something changed in me. I cannot explain it. It was like a key turning in a lock, like everything in my life suddenly made sense. I knew right then that I had found what I had been waiting for." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only just met. But I cannot leave Dodge City without telling you that I am falling in love with you, Sarah Mitchell. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I will stay. I will give up the traveling and the detective work and everything else. I will stay right here and build a life with you if you will have me." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. She realized that she had been holding her breath, waiting for him to say exactly this. You would give up your work? For me? In a heartbeat, Jack said simply. The work was just something to fill the emptiness. You fill it better. You fill it perfectly. Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at his face. I barely know you, Jack Thornton. By all reasonable standards, I should tell you this is madness and send you on your way. But, Jack asked, hope lighting his eyes, but I have never been very good at being reasonable. And yesterday, when you walked into that jail and promised to save me, something in me recognized you. Like my soul had been waiting for you just as long as yours had been waiting for me. Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. I am falling in love with you too, Jack. And yes, I want you to stay. I want to know everything about you. I want to build a life with you. I want everything. Jack's face transformed with pure joy. And then he was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Sarah went willingly, pressing herself against his solid warmth. They stood there by the river, holding each other as the sun set in a blaze of gold and orange, two people who had found each other against all odds. I am going to kiss you now, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. If that is all right. I will be very disappointed if you do not, Sarah said, smiling through her tears. Jack lowered his head and kissed her, gentle and sweet at first, then deeper as Sarah melted against him. His hands came up to cup her face, his touch reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. Sarah kissed him back with all the emotion of the past 2 days, all the fear and relief and joy and love pouring into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I am never letting you go, he said. You know that, right? You are stuck with me now. Good, Sarah said, laughing, because I am not letting you go either. They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans as they went. Jack would send a telegram to the Cattlemen's Association, telling them he was retiring from detective work. He had saved enough money to open a small security business in Dodge City, providing guards for businesses and tracking down local thieves. Sarah would move forward with her dress shop. They would court properly for a few months, let the town see that their relationship was real and lasting, and then they would marry. Although, Jack said with a grin, after you almost dying and me saving your life, I think we can skip straight to the part where everyone knows we are meant for each other. We should still do it properly, Sarah said, but she was smiling. I want a proper courtship, Jack Thornton. I want you to bring me flowers and take me to dances and court me like a gentleman. I can do that, Jack said. I can be a gentleman, when I want to be. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Jack took a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, much to the landlady's delight, and proceeded to court Sarah with a determination that left the whole town talking. He brought her wildflowers every morning. He took her to the theater when a traveling show came through town. He sat in her room watching her sew and telling her stories until Mrs. Henderson had to remind them about propriety. Word spread quickly about the detective who had saved Sarah Mitchell and then stayed for love. Women sighed over the romance of it. Men clapped Jack on the back and congratulated him. Judge Parker himself told Jack that Dodge City was lucky to have him staying on. Gerald Morrison came to Sarah's room one afternoon, hat in hand, to offer a formal apology and a substantial sum of money as compensation for her ordeal. Sarah accepted the apology but refused the money, telling him to donate it to the church instead. She did not need his money. She had Jack, and she had her freedom, and that was worth more than all the gold in Kansas. Thomas Reed was tried and convicted of theft and fraud. Judge Parker, taking into account his confession and his genuine remorse, sentenced him to 5 years in prison rather than hanging. Sarah visited him once before he was transported to the territorial prison, not to forgive him, but to tell him that she hoped he would use his time to become a better man. Thomas had cried and thanked her, and Sarah left feeling that perhaps some good had come from the terrible ordeal after all. 6 weeks after the night Jack had saved her life, on a warm September evening when the Kansas prairie was turning gold with approaching autumn, Jack Thornton went down on one knee in Mrs. Henderson's parlor and asked Sarah Mitchell to marry him. The ring was simple, a silver band with a small diamond. But to Sarah, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and kissing him. "Yes, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in October, in the Dodge City church with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself, white silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Jack wore a new black suit and looked so handsome that Sarah could hardly breathe when she saw him waiting at the altar. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony. Judge Parker gave a speech at the reception about justice and love being two sides of the same coin. Even Sheriff Hawkins got a bit misty-eyed when Jack and Sarah exchanged their vows. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, with a garden out back and enough room for Sarah's sewing and Jack's office. Sarah opened her dress shop on Front Street, calling it Mitchell's Fine Dresses, and within weeks she had more orders than she could handle. Jack's security business thrived as well, with local merchants eager to hire the famous detective who had cracked the Morrison Mill case. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah would work in her shop during the day, creating beautiful dresses for the women of Dodge City and surrounding towns. Jack would make his rounds, checking on his clients, occasionally investigating a theft or tracking down a runaway horse. In the evenings, they would come home to each other, to their little house that smelled of Sarah's lavender water and Jack's coffee, and they would talk about their days and their dreams. A year after their wedding, Sarah told Jack she was expecting a baby. Jack's reaction was pure joy mixed with terror, gathering her carefully in his arms as if she might break. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in the spring of 1880, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the whole house shake. Jack paced the hallway while Mrs. Henderson and the midwife attended to Sarah, his face pale with worry. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and angry and alive, he nearly collapsed with relief. They named him James, after Jack's father, and he had Sarah's dark hair and Jack's honey-colored eyes. Jack held his son with hands that shook, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of such overwhelming love that Sarah started crying all over again. "He is perfect," Jack whispered. "You are perfect. I am the luckiest man alive." 2 years later, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, with red gold hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Jack adored both his children with a fierce protectiveness that sometimes made Sarah laugh. He taught James to ride before the boy could walk properly. He let Elizabeth sit on his lap while he worked, explaining about his cases in a serious voice while she gurgled and grabbed at his papers. Sarah's dress shop expanded, and she hired 2 assistants to help with the workload. Jack's business grew as well, and he took on a partner, a young man named Daniel, who reminded Jack of himself at that age. They were prosperous and happy and deeply in love, just as much as they had been that first night by the Arkansas River. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jack took Sarah back to that spot by the river, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson for the evening. They stood in the same place where he had first told her he loved her, watching the sun set in a glory of gold and orange. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, leaning against his solid warmth. "Giving up the detective work, the traveling, all of that?" Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Not for a single second. That life was just a way of marking time until I found you. This life with you and James and Elizabeth, this is the life I was meant for. You are the life I was meant for." "I love you," Sarah said, turning in his arms to look up at him. "I loved you from the moment you walked into that jail cell and promised to save me. And I will love you until the day I die." "And I will love you beyond that," Jack said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Into whatever comes after. You are my heart, Sarah Thornton. You are everything." They stood there as the sun set and the stars came out. 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a life full of light. In the years to come, there would be more children, 3 more in total, 2 boys and a girl. There would be challenges and hard times, as there always are. There would be droughts and economic downturns and all the struggles that come with building a life in a frontier town. But through it all, Jack and Sarah had each other. They had the love that had sparked in a jail cell and bloomed by a river. They had the life they had chosen, the family they had built, the home they had made, and they had the story that would be told in Dodge City for generations to come. The story of the seamstress who was almost hanged and the cowboy detective who saved her life and stayed for love. It became legend, growing with each telling. But those who had been there, who had watched it unfold, knew that no embellishment was needed. The truth was extraordinary enough. Love at first sight, a life saved, a mystery solved, and two souls finding their match against all odds. On warm summer evenings, when Jack and Sarah were old and gray and surrounded by children and grandchildren, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the Kansas prairie. Jack would take Sarah's hand, gnarled with arthritis but still strong, and she would lean her head on his shoulder, and they would remember. They remembered a desperate night when the noose waited at dawn. They remembered a tall cowboy with honey-colored eyes making an impossible promise. They remembered the moment by the river when they chose each other, chose love, chose life. "Best decision I ever made," Jack would say. "Which one?" Sarah would ask, teasing. "Investigating my case or staying in Dodge City?" "Loving you," Jack would answer every single time. "Loving you was the best decision I ever made." And Sarah, who had once thought she would die alone and afraid in a jail cell, would smile and kiss her husband of 40 years and know that miracles were real because she had lived one, because love had saved her life just as surely as Jack's detective work had. They died within months of each other, Jack first at the age of 73, and Sarah following soon after, unable to imagine a world without him in it. They were buried side by side in the Dodge City Cemetery under a cottonwood tree that whispered in the Kansas wind. Their children and grandchildren told their story at family gatherings, making sure each new generation knew about the grain theft and the false accusation and the cowboy who saved the day. The dress shop stayed in the family for 3 generations, and Jack's security business became one of the most respected in Kansas. But more than the businesses or the material legacy, Jack and Sarah left behind the proof that love can happen in an instant and last a lifetime. That justice matters. That believing in someone, even a stranger, can change the course of their entire life. That the best love stories are the ones where two people choose each other, not just once, but every single day for the rest of their lives. In Dodge City, when the wind blows right and the sun sets gold over the prairie, old-timers swear you can still see 2 figures standing by the Arkansas River, a tall cowboy and a dark-haired seamstress, holding hands and watching the sunset together. And maybe, just maybe, they are right, because some loves are too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves echo through the ages, reminding us all that miracles can happen, that heroes exist, and that when you find the person who makes your soul sing, you hold on tight and never let go. Jack and Sarah knew that truth. They lived it every day from that desperate night in 1878 until their last breaths decades later. And their love, born in darkness and desperation, grew into something bright and beautiful and eternal. It was a love worth fighting for, a love worth staying for, a love worth everything. And in the end, that is the only kind of love worth having at all.